Marshal Martello, Chapter 4, Kansas City Shenanigans. Eleanor Jane-Morgan announced her candidacy for mayor of Kansas City with the quiet confidence of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. To those who only knew her as Jesse Morgan's charming wife, the move seemed sudden. To those who had watched her closely, it was the natural next step in a long, patient campaign. She had spent years weaving herself into the fabric of the town's commercial and social life, sharing coffee with freight company owners, listening to merchant complaints about rising costs, remembering the names of their children and the brands of their favorite whiskey. She had earned the trust of men who moved money and goods across the territories, positioning herself as someone who understood the delicate balance required to keep commerce flowing between Kansas City and towns like Sawtooth. Her campaign message was simple: stability. At every gathering, every church social, every private dinner, she spoke in warm, measured tones. Kansas City's prosperity depends on protecting the steady flow of commerce through our rail depots and freight yards, she would say in her southern drawl, softening the edge of her words. Federal investigations, if handled carelessly, could disrupt that balance. What this town needs is leadership focused on maintaining order while allowing honest business to continue without unnecessary interference. She never raised her voice. She never attacked Martello by name. She simply painted a picture of a rigid outsider, stirring up trouble where none had existed before. The quiet prosperity threatened by zealous outsiders who didn't understand how the West really worked, and the businessman listened. To them, stability meant profit, and profit meant survival in a West that was changing faster than most people were prepared to admit. But Eleanor was not the only candidate stepping forward. Soon after her announcement, her younger sister Anna Jane declared her candidacy for county sheriff, a decision that struck many as absurd. Anna had never shown any real interest in law enforcement or politics. She was known as a quiet, polite, and largely removed from public disputes, which in many ways made her the perfect candidate. Where Eleanor projected confidence and calculated political skill, Anna offered humility and reassurance. She spoke softly at town meetings about restoring trust between the community and the law. She never mentioned Martello by name, but the implication was always there: gentle, reasonable, and effective. Sometimes Anna would say in a quiet voice, "Aggressive investigations and sudden arrests do more harm than good. Maybe we should focus on working with the people we already have, rather than bringing in outsiders who don't understand how things work here." The contrast between the two sisters was masterful. Eleanor, the capable leader who would protect commerce; Anna, the gentle sheriff who would protect the community from overreach. Together, they represented a complete vision, one that felt both natural and inevitable. Eleanor understood the board perfectly. While Martello chased shadows in the open with questions and badges, she was quietly building an empire in plain sight. Every smile, every carefully placed suggestion, every whispered conversation was another piece moved into position. And the game was only just beginning. The implication was subtle, but clear enough for those paying attention. Perhaps the law had been working just fine before the marshals arrived. Taken separately, the two campaigns appeared harmless, even coincidental. Together, they revealed something far more deliberate: control of the town. And while these political efforts steadily gained momentum, Blake Ryder and Murph McGuire rode into Kansas City to begin the second phase of the investigation. Blake Ryder, young and ambitious, sat tall in the saddle, his eyes bright with excitement. "Look at this place, Murph," he said as if they passed through the railing depot. "This isn't some backwater like Sawtooth. This is real progress. Proper records, proper business. Martello's probably chasing shadows out here." Murph McGuire, quieter and more reserved, scanned the crowded streets. Maybe, but the boss seemed pretty sure something was off. Blake laughed. "Come on, the old man's been riding alone too long. He sees conspiracies everywhere. We do this right, we'll have this wrapped up in a couple of weeks and be back to Washington with a solid report on our record." At first, the two marshals found nothing justified At first, the two marshals found nothing that justified Martello's suspicions. Businesses appeared legitimate, manifests were properly stamped, and rail shipments matched their paperwork with careful precision. Kansas City felt like a modern town, efficient, profitable, and well managed. But the longer they remained, the more subtle inconsistencies began to surface. Shipments scheduled for Monday that quietly arrived on Sunday night, wagons listed as carrying simple agricultural tools that weighed far more than their invoices suggested, and freight inspectors who were suddenly reassigned wherever certain deliveries passed through the depot. Blake leaned over to Murph one afternoon as they left another warehouse. You see that? Another manifest that doesn't add up. This could be it. We bring this back and we look like heroes. Murph frowned. It's still thin. We need something solid. None of these details amounted to proof on their own, yet the pattern was undeniable, and more importantly, someone was watching them closely. The man who eventually approached them did so in the most ordinary way possible. He introduced himself as a trader who had heard about the marshals asking questions, and presented himself as a concerned businessman eager to protect Kansas City's prosperity from criminal interference, offering his assistance in a way to help uncover the truth. Blake offer Blake welcomed the offer immediately. This is perfect, he told Murph later that evening. A man who actually knows freight business works around here. We'll have this network mapped out in no time. Murph accepted more cautiously. I don't know. Something feels off about how eager he is. Blake waved it away. You worry too much. This is how you get ahead. You take help when it's offered. Martello's way is too slow. We play this smart, we'll be the ones who actually solve it. Neither man realized that they had just stepped directly into the influence of the night shaders. The shift was subtle, almost invisible at first, but once the seeds of doubt were planted, they began to grow with quiet persistence. While Blake Ryder and Murph McGuire tried to navigate the increasingly complex and politically layered environment of Kansas City, Eleanor Jane-Morgan's campaign continued gaining strength. Her public speeches painted her as a stabilizing force in uncertain times. Anna Jane spoke carefully about restoring cooperation between local law enforcement and federal authorities. Language that sounded supportive on the surface, yet quietly reinforced the idea that Martello had disrupted a system that had functioned just fine before his arrival. By the time election cycle began dominating conversations in Kansas City, something had already shifted inside the two younger marshals. Blake Ryder, eager and ambitious, had arrived convinced this assignment was his chance to shine. He wanted the big arrest, the commendation, the story he could tell back in Washington. He was the first to embrace the trader's help. This is exactly what we needed, Blake said one evening. His eyes bright reviewed the notes in their rented room. Mr. Harlan knows every freight agent in the city. With his guidance, we'll have this network mapped out before Martello even gets another telegram. Murph McGuire, quieter and more introspective, was harder to read. He preferred watching from the edges, but he was starting to feel the pull. The trader Harlan was masterful. He never pushed, he simply offered perspective. One afternoon, while walking the rail yards, Harlan gestured at a long line of freight cars. You boys see crime everywhere because that's what you're looking for. But look closer. This is just business. Men trying to make a living in a hard country. But sometimes the rules bend a little. Don't make them monsters. Blake nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. Martello's been out here too long. He sees every irregularity as conspiracy. Murph said nothing at first, but later that night he admitted quietly to Blake, maybe we are pushing too hard. Kansas City doesn't feel like a den of criminals. It feels organized. Every lead they followed seemed productive at first, only to dissolve into nothing. Shipments that looked suspicious turned out to have perfectly legitimate explanations. Witnesses who hinted at wrongdoing later claimed there had been a misunderstanding. Clerks apologized for paperwork errors that just seemed to keep happening. Blake grew more confident with each dead end. See, we're actually making progress by being careful. Martello would have kicked in doors and made enemies. We're being smart. Murph knew Murph's doubt grew slower, but it grew. He found himself wondering whether Martello's instincts, sharpened by years in the wilderness, were ill suited for a modern city where everything looked clean on paper. Meanwhile, Eleanor's campaign evolved from an ambitious gesture into something formidable. She presented herself differently to every group: stability and commerce to the merchants and freight companies, cooperation and calm to the citizens, measured and leadership to the politicians. Every message carried the same quiet implication. Kansas City did not need disruption, it needed balance. The deeper Blake and Murph pushed into Kansas City, the less it resembled the raw frontier towns Martello had spent his life riding through. Sawtooth still moved to the rhythm of horses and wagons. Kansas City operated on rail schedules, contracts, and money passing quietly through respectable hands. It presented an image of order and prosperity that made it appear stable, which is precisely what made it so dangerous. Blake and Murph arrived believing they were stepping into the center of the conspiracy Martello had uncovered. Instead, they found themselves in a place that seemed almost too clean, where the rail depot functioned like clockwork, freight manifests were neatly recorded, warehouses were filled with legitimate goods, merchants greeted them politely, and local deputies cooperated without hesitation. The investigation appeared productive on the surface. A handful of shipments raised questions. Certain traders spoke in half-truths, but every time they followed a lead, the trail ended somewhere ordinary, explained away by a clerk's mistake, a weather delay, or documentation that appeared completely legitimate. Slowly, without either man realizing it, the direction of the investigation began to shift. Instead of uncovering a hidden criminal network, Blake and Murph found themselves repeatedly explaining why they believed one existed at all. Show them order where chaos should be. Let every ledger balance perfectly. Let every official smile and cooperate. Make the corruption invisible by wrapping it in respectability. Draw them in with helpful allies. Offer guidance. Feed them just enough half-truths to make them feel smart, while steering them away from anything real. Make them believe they are the ones discovering the truth. Bury the signal in the noise. Turn every solid lead into a dozen ends. Let doubt grow naturally until the investigators themselves begin to question whether there was ever a crime at all. The night shaders were not fighting them with guns. They were winning with smiles, paperwork, and the gentle art of making doubt feel like wisdom. Anna Jane's campaign for county sheriff followed a similar path. Through her approach differed in tone and presentation. Where Eleanor commanded rooms with confidence and precision, Anna positioned herself as the opposite: humble, approachable, and quietly committed to restoring the trust between citizens and the law. The contrast was masterful. Eleanor appeared capable of leading the town. Anna appeared capable of protecting it. Together, they offered voters a complete and comforting vision, a future that felt calmer, more stable, and far more predictable than the uncertainty Martello had introduced. The elections were not overwhelming landslides, but they were decisive enough to leave little room for dispute. When the results were finalized, Eleanor Jane-Morgan emerged as the new mayor of Kansas City, and Anna Jane secured her position as county sheriff, both leadership and law now firmly in their hands. For most citizens, it simply felt as though the town had chosen two familiar, trustworthy faces to guide them through uncertain times. Few recognized the timing of those victories for what they truly were. Not long after the elections, Eleanor began hosting a series of quiet, carefully curated gatherings in Kansas City. On the surface, they appeared to be nothing more than ordinary civic celebrations. Merchants, freight supervisors, deputies, and local officials attended. Occasionally, so did the federal marshals. It was at one of those gatherings that Eleanor introduced Anna Jane to Murph McGuire in a way that felt entirely natural. "Marshal McGuire," Eleanor said warmingly, guiding her sister forward. "This is my sister Anna. She's just been elected sheriff, and she's very eager to build working relationships with the federal marshals. She believes cooperation is the only way forward." Anna offered a shy, genuine-looking smile and spoke softly. It's an honor. I know things have been tense lately. I just want to help make things smoother for everyone. Murph, who had never been comfortable in crowded or politically charged rooms, found himself unexpectedly at ease in Anna's presence. She spoke gently, listened carefully, and never pressed. For the first time since arriving in Kansas City, Murph found himself opening up. He told her about the weight of expectations, the challenges of enforcing federal law in growing towns, and how outsiders often misunderstood the delicate balance required to keep a place like Kansas City functioning. Anna listened with quiet concern, nodding at all the right moments. When he mentioned the narcotics investigation and Martello's suspicions, she responded with gentle thoughtfulness. I don't doubt Marshal Martello's intentions, she said softly, her eyes sincere, but sometimes when a man has spent so many years alone on a trail, every shadow starts to look like a threat. Don't you think it's possible to see patterns that aren't really there? Murph didn't answer right away, but the seed had been planted. Anna never argued, she never pushed. She simply listened, asked gentle questions, and allowed Murph to reach conclusions that felt like his own. Over the following weeks, their interactions became more frequent, sometimes framed as professional discussions between the sheriff's office and the marshals, other times taking on a quieter, more personal tone through evening walks or private dinners on the edge of town. To Murph, the connection felt genuine. To Eleanor, it was simply another piece falling neatly into place. Murph was not a corrupt man by nature, and that was precisely what made him so useful. A man who believed he was doing the right thing could be guided far more easily than one who knew he was not. While Murph's perspective shifted slowly under Anna's gentle influence, Blake Ryder's transformation followed a different and far more obvious path. His ambition burned bright and hot. He loved the respect that came with the badge, the way merchants greeted him by name, the way local officials sought his opinion. The trader Harlan fed that hunger masterfully with praise and insider information. You've got sharp eyes, Marshal Ryder, Harlan would say with a knowing smile. Not like some of those older fellows who only see what they want to see. You understand how business really works out here. Blake ate it up. Every day he grew more convinced that he, not Martello, was truly cracking the case. Every dead end became proof that Martello had been overzealous. Every convenient explanation from Harlan felt like a brilliant discovery. The manipulation was working perfectly. By the time either men realized how deeply they had been turned, it was already too late. The Nightshaders had not needed to threaten them. They simply had given them new stories to believe, stories that felt better, safer, and far more rewarding than the truth. Blake had begun to thoroughly enjoy the authority that came with his position in Kansas City. Merchants treated him with respect, local officials sought his approval, and even the mayor's office welcomed him as a necessary figure in maintaining stability throughout the region. The longer he remained, the more Martello's methods began to feel outdated and heavy-handed by comparison. Where Martello saw corruption in every irregularity, Blake saw a town functioning efficiency. Where Martello believed in direct confrontation, Blake increasingly convinced himself that diplomacy and understanding were the smarter, more modern approach. Slowly, almost without notice, the investigation began losing its urgency. Reports sent back to Sawtooth grew more cautious, more uncertain. Leads that seemed promising were now described as inconclusive. The idea of a widespread narcotics network was gradually refamed as speculation rather than fact. Felmer noticed the change first. During one of their evening meetings in the temporary marshal's office, Felmer sat down Blake's latest report with a heavy sigh. This reads like you're defending the town instead of investigating it, he said, his voice low but firm. We came here because Martello found smoke. Now you're telling me there's no fire. Blake shifted uncomfortably but held his ground. With respect, Chief, Kansas City isn't Sawtooth. Everything here is documented, organized. Maybe Martello's been out on the frontier so long, he started seeing threats that aren't there. Calhoun, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, had noticed it even more sharply. He had known Martello for decades. He had seen the man's instincts save lives more times than he could count. The shift in Blake's tone troubled him deeply. Careful, son, Calhoun said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. I've seen men like you before. Smart, ambitious, and eager to prove themselves. That's exactly how good men get turned. They start thinking they're smarter than the trail they're following. Blake bristled. I'm not being turned. I'm being objective. Calhoun's eyes narrowed. Objective is one thing. Blind is another. Felmer remained consistent for the moment. Felmer remained confident for the moment, but he could feel the ground shifting beneath them. He tried to steer the younger marshals back on course during strategy sessions, reminding them of their original irregularities that Martello had uncovered, but the transformation unfolded gradually enough that no simple moment could expose it outright. Every small concession Blake and Murph made felt reasonable. Every softened report made it felt professional. And from her office overlooking the busy streets of Kansas City, Mayor Eleanor Jane-Morgan observed the entire process with quiet, patient satisfaction. She didn't need to speak to them directly. Her people were doing that work for her. The most effective conspiracies she knew did not rely on violence. They relied on perception. They relied on convincing ambitious young men that they were far more wiser than the old guard. By the time anyone began to question what had happened, the investigation had already been subtly redirected. The people responsible for controlling it were no longer operating in the shadows. They were sitting comfortably inside the very offices meant to stop them. Coming soon, Chapter 5, Politics.